All right, everybody, welcome back. It's the end of the world with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu, and today we are talking about everyone's favorite thing. That's right, robots.
What? Yes, everyone's favorite thing.
Yeah, who doesn't love a robot? I mean, I love robots, you love robots, that's kind of, we've been on a little bit of a series, an informal series here the last bunch of episodes talking about various works of fiction that imagine, be they films or stories, as in last week, that imagine, mechanical beings and the potential problems they might cause, some of which, as we'll discuss today, might even be a threat to end the world. But we're going to be talking about the history of robots. We're going to be talking about Elon Musk's fascination with these humanoid robots. But before we get into that, we'll talk about something related, and that is these drones that recently launched a massive attack across Russia on behalf of the Ukrainians. And these...
What was the basic... What's the 411 on how this actually worked?
I'm not entirely...
What was the scale in the end? Do we know?
No, I mean, the problem is, of course, because we're dependent on two unreliable narrators for the story. So the Ukrainians claim that 40 Russian bombers, which is about half of their bombing fleet, were destroyed by these small drones that attacked on Sunday. And the Russians, of course, say, no, that's greatly exaggerated. It was actually 12 that were slightly damaged or something like that, right? But if you've seen any footage on social media, it's apparent that the scale of this attack is unlike anything that we've seen so far in this already very horrible war, right? And what seems to be interesting is that the targets were far away from Ukraine. They included bases in and around Moscow, and even some bases as far away as Siberia. So what seems to have happened is these drones were smuggled into Russia and launched. They weren't sent from Ukraine. Like, they were taken to Russia and then launched from within Russia to carry out.
They were sent in these wooden cabins.
That's right. Yeah.
Where, I mean, it's whatever the actual scale of it is, the individual transporting of the actual drones to the middle of nowhere in places like Siberia. Well, it does seem to be fairly impressive at the very least, right?
Yeah. Go on.
So what happened was they basically got these sort of just like regular Joe drivers who are all Russian, right?
Yep.
From what I've read, they're not Ukrainian, and they just traveled in some cases thousands of kilometers with the drones tucked away in these wooden cabins, and they were just given an address to where to drop off these cabins, and then the shipments all had retractable openings, right?
Yeah.
And then all these drones just started flying out of them, and then I guess each individual drone was piloted by someone remotely, and then they were basically just scurrying around an airbase trying to locate and destroy whatever they could.
But primarily their targets seem to have been the large bombers, because those are the most difficult to cover up. These are huge planes, so the infrastructure cost of building massive hangars to conceal every one of your 100 bombers or whatever isn't that practical. And certainly the U.S. bombers around the world are visible from satellite. You can see them parked at their bases. Mm-hmm. And what struck me about this was that this is kind of a game-changing event. And
it's not like it's a different idea and different scale, but we had that Israeli operation,
right? The
pagers.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you're right. There's something of a new style of warfare that's clearly coming out of this moment.
And, my first thought about seeing this, of course, was, oh, someone's going to do this in America, right? And like that the next
Yeah.
9/11 style attack will probably have something of this character. Now, will it target our military bases? Maybe more likely will it target civilian
Civilian infrastructure or
tourist
people.
locations, sporting events. Who knows, right? I mean, it could be any number of things, but the possibilities are pretty grim. And
Yeah.
I don't know what defenses are in place that could intervene. I mean, I also thought back about this sort of paranoid New Jersey drones. It's an
Hmm.
Iranian mothership. That kind of that whole line of thinking. And I think the other obvious question is because as we speak, the Ukrainian and Russians are meeting in Istanbul, trying to negotiate some kind of peace deal. Uh, don't think this helps in the.
No, and the thing that strikes me is just that it. I mean, the scale of the thing was such that it took a very, very long time, right? So the actual operation apparently had been being planned for over a year,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Which makes a lot of sense, right? Identifying all of these targets, amassing as much of this information as you could. Interesting, like I remember, like early in Trump's like pivot towards Russia and critique of Ukraine during the campaign and the election, that part of it was about stopping the sharing of a lot of satellite imagery. Do you remember this?
yep,
That was like one of the pieces that the American administration started saying was that like some of the intelligence sharing things would be off the table. Europe said that they would help, but the idea was like there's no way they can actually replace the capabilities of the US. It's very interesting that this came sort of on the heels of that, right? That that was specifically pointed out. And I know that was like a large part of the function because they weren't um, sending actual troops and whatnot. But it is fascinating that that was something that was sort of pointed out, and then we can see the takeaway for me is just like, yes, okay, it takes a long time to do that sort of intelligence work,
yeah,
but man, the whether it's I don't care whether it's 10 or 40. I mean, the process just feels pretty simple. Like you're saying, in terms of how you actually defend that, it's like they, people weren't even knowing what they were driving, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm assuming that it's not like the truckers were, you know, the equivalent of Ukrainian CIA agents. I think they
Right.
were.
Or the hijackers in 9/11, right? Like there's no th- those people knew what they were
Right.
doing,
Yeah,
what the
yeah.
assignment was. Now we're in this weird era where you can just unwittingly
Unwittingly.
be
Yeah.
carrying military equipment to destroy things without while you think that you're dropping off an envelope.
Yeah. Yeah. Scary, right? Now these drones are robots of a sort. They are remote control operated robots. I mean, they're
How
piloted.
big were they? Did you see?
I think they're quite small. I mean, the drones the U.S. was using during the Obama administration in the the Predator drones, right?
Mhm.
Were huge. These are massive things that fly very high, and
Like
that
plane sized
not quite full,
drones?
not a fully a plane, but yes,
Okay.
like a small plane. They're
Mhm.
20 feet long in some cases, right?
Okay.
These seem to be much smaller, and I think the advantage is you attack with numbers, right?
Yeah,
If
and
they're
if
small
you're going after a single plane for a single drone, you don't need that big of an armament, that big of a bomb,
to
right? You're not
disable
trying
it,
to
yeah,
you're not trying to blow up a whole building or a whole base, right? You're just like, oh, let's take a plane.
blow up the wing or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's
And it's also like what can happen in this regard with a nation with an even far far superior, bigger military, right? Like, what could countries like China and Russia do if they implement this type of strategy?
right, and I mean, in a way, it's
And the
reminiscent,
U.S., it's fair to say.
right? Also, it reminds me a little bit of the Vietnam War problem of yes, the U.S. is greatly outspent and has many more bombers and planes. But
Hmm.
but the Vietnamese had this advantage of being able to tactically strike in,
Right.
it's like a guerrilla war tactic, except
Hmm.
in the sort of age of robotic military, which is ominous. And as you say, if you take this to bigger scale, like maybe it's not so much hypersonic missiles we should fear, but
Right. Right. Death by drone.
right. I mean, we'll see. Moving on to another side of this. So those are drones. They're remote controlled. The kind of dream is the autonomous drone, and the thing that will allow that autonomy is, of course, AI, which we've been talking about forever, right? I mean, it's probably one of the two or three. Climate change, AI, those are probably the two biggest recurring themes of the whole show so far. And I think with good reason, because today we get this report from Axios, which I've heard a lot of people discussing already,
Yeah.
which basically implies that in as soon as the next year, AI could spike unemployment up to 20%, and that's largely the number of white collar entry level jobs that could be eliminated entirely in order and be replaced by artificial intelligence. And there's absolutely nothing. No, the government isn't talking about this. I feel like the major networks aren't even talking about it, and I think part of the reason and that you have a little quote here that explains why they aren't talking about it is because they're already doing it, right?
Right.
Like, um,
Well, I mean, and to give a sense of the scale, right? If it would using the 20%, which again, like it's it does say 10 to 20%, but I mean, I don't think anybody really knows
yeah,
if it's 30, right? Because no one's really, even the people who are sort of talking about it, nobody actually knows exactly what each individual CEO is going to be willing to do in regards to its workforce. But just to give a sense, it's like the unemployment rate um, in July 2020 for
yeah.
COVID reached 14%, right? And like that felt like nobody was working.
That felt like 100%, right?
Yeah. And you just think about actually finding, I mean, it's happening everywhere. You can see it, like I was reading the other day that the sixth most downloaded app in America is indeed.com,
Yeah,
right? Like we are talking about this very quiet for now jobs crisis. And I think it's quiet for a lot of reasons. I think a lot of people who are most affected are oftentimes freelance and have some level of money as opposed to just going to zero, that right, they retain some client or some one company's doesn't want to do AI yet and they're still finding a bit of work, and there's no real sense of organization or community in the gig economy and the freelance economy. So it's all very diffuse, but like, I don't know what your experience is like, but I get together with a group of people and most of them are either worried or in some sort of weird space between unemployed and full time,
right. A kind of limbo.
getting offered less money, getting offered less projects, and sort of running into, and I think we'll definitely do an episode of this, the feeling that the job listings aren't real, right?
Well, yeah, I think
And
we've
a lot of people have experienced that. Like, wait a minute, like these job postings are up on these sites
and
forever,
they've
and
been up
very
there for
so,
6 months or whatever.
yeah. And so there's all of this, um, and the character in the article, which how do you pronounce his name? Do you know?
I have no amod
Amodai?
amodai. Yeah, that would be my guess.
Yeah.
Amodei. Ooh, DEI. Ooh.
So he's one of these classic, like, I'm building it and I'm so worried about it assholes,
I love that.
right? But just like, just want to let everybody know, it's kind of time to hold all the institutions' feet to the fire because of what we're kind of
Because of what
doing.
I'm
So
doing.
yeah, it's an incredible logic that does really feel like a very basic and essential projection, right? That
Yeah.
is going on with characters like this, where they're they can see the writing on the wall in terms of the way it could go, and so they're basically getting out ahead and be like, no, I told Washington to take a look at the issue. right? And it's like this amazing characteristic of a lot of these guys, which is like they think that they're bringing down the nation state. They ridicule the lack of efficiency and regulatory powers, or there's too much regulatory power, or it's corrupt and nothing ever gets done, and it takes this long to build a road and all of this stuff. And if you give it to us, wait for the abundance and everything will be. And then though, when like it starts to coming to any type of negative consequence, the first thing is like, really don't feel like Washington and businesses are taking this seriously.
Right. And I love that in the article, it basically says what you've just kind of outlined, that a lot of CEOs and execs are kind of like trying to figure out what jobs can already effectively be replaced by AI and what jobs cannot. And then there's this thing in the Axios article, which is like full disclosure.
Oh yeah, this is great.
At Axios, we ask our managers to explain why AI won't be doing a specific job before greenlighting its approval. Like, wait, what?
Uh-huh.
And then in parentheses,
that's some sort of like part of the collective bargaining, I guess, that they have. Is that right? Where like instead of AI actually fully right, like I write for places that are really adamant against the one place I write is very adamant against the use of AI right
sure.
now.
Because I think some people who are early adopters got pretty burned by that.
That's right. That's right. And so, but what's happening here? Are we reading this right? That like they say like, hey, so there's this AI, and they probably pitch it to them like it's going to help you with your research, and it's going to help with like formatting issues and getting things into the back end, so it'll take you even less time to actually write the format of the piece.
Right.
You can go to this AI for like outline ideas, right? If you're stuck on how to get through a piece, instead of like having to email an editor 15 times, you can run it through this guy first and see if it just unlocks any ideas. Like, is that what you think is that basically means?
I had a little trouble with the syntax. Like it almost sounds like we ask our managers to explain why AI won't be doing a specific job before greenlighting its approval. It almost means like, why isn't AI doing this? So,
Really, or does it mean like are they asking for some
well, they say it in the next
proof
sentence.
of how it won't lead to an AI taking a job?
I'm not sure because it says in the parentheses, Axios stories are always written and edited by humans. It's
Yeah,
like,
I
oh,
mean that is what an AI would say.
yeah. Few want to admit this publicly, but every CEO is or will soon be doing this
Mm-hmm.
privately. And there's they say this will likely juice historic growth for the winners, big AI companies, the creators of new businesses, feeding off AI.
Mm-hmm.
Existing companies running faster and vastly more profitably, the wealthy investors betting on this outcome. So it's like the winners are going to do great.
Yeah.
like some
I mean,
people
I
are
think
really
that's
well positioned here.
essentially what seems to be this is a great example. We'll talk a little bit about the blue collar side of things, but like in the white collar thing, I think it's obviously got quicker potential, right? Because of the idea of like this is like for copy editing and
Well,
print ads
and
and
coding.
coding, right? So like there's a quote from is it Zuckerberg is like essentially the meta code, like the meta AI is going to be able to like there's a functional mid-level engineer
Yep,
basically.
and we can
Same.
get rid of all of those human mid-level engineers,
That's
and
right.
they've already
And
started reducing workforce.
that's right. And so to me it's this great example of the illustration of how far of a remove people are from the means of production, right? In the sense that there's this line from the truth teller, our CEO friend, who
Not doomsayer, truth teller.
yeah, he sees himself as a truth teller, not a doomsayer. Oh, thanks, good. I'm so glad you don't see yourself as a doomsayer. That makes me feel so much better. I see myself. Imagine I see myself as kind of a doomsayer. Like, why? Like, of course you're not gonna. But yeah, it's the situation that like just the ability to say this right to a national publication. This is what he says. The result could be a great concentration of wealth, and quote, it could become difficult for a substantial part of the population to really contribute, and that's really bad. We don't
Oh,
want that.
yeah.
Oh, okay. The balance, and he continues, the balance of power in democracy, amazing, is premised on the average person having leverage through creating economic value. If that's not present, I think things become kind of scary. Inequality becomes scary, and I'm worried about it. Now, there's a lot to go through here, and we can't really. We will reach the point where we probably do an episode itself on labor and AI.
And this is kind of a preview of what some of that will consist in.
Because this is really like, this is a kind of incredible thing for me for two reasons. One is like just the ability to be willing to say this out loud on the public record and not realize that you're either at best like a truly evil person or a complete and utter fool, right? Like you're like that. Those are the options here. You're literally saying the thing that you're building is doing the thing that it's so obviously doing, but also without really registering that like people like him and people who have been creating all the things that came before that for a very long time, also have already created this exact phenomenon. Oh, like, yes, it's gonna get worse. I'm not questioning that, but like the idea of like, you know what? We don't want it to become difficult for a substantial part of the population to really contribute. Really? Well, where the hell have you been? Like, what are you talking about? Everyone's driving around grocery shopping for richer people.
Yeah.
Like, it's already happened.
Uber, like, Uber drivers, etc.
And then I think there's kind of a tell. Just the last thing I want to say about him is like there's kind of a tell at the end. He says if it's premised on the average person having leverage through creating economic value.
Right.
If that's not present, I think things become kind of scary. Inequality becomes scary. And I think the tell there is this very real and already terrible, brutish level of inequality.
But it's not yet scary.
It is not yet scary. And yeah, that is definitely something that we should consider about the scale of the AI thing. But it's amazing that even the people who think they're on the good side of the AI thing, right, are like, yeah, so everything right now is really pretty hunky-dory. Everyone's kind of creating some leverage through their economic value. And it's like, what?
What are you talking about, bro?
I can't remember the last time I felt I had, I don't know how many times I would use the word leverage.
I mean, I can't spend $100 million or whatever, $300 million like Elon Musk did in the last election, right?
That's right. I mean, and so it's just kind of laughable to see that. And again, I think he's just trying to like, even if at a subconscious level, like justify.
He's also trying to be like, I'm one of the good ones, though.
Right. He's probably going to bed and having like.
He probably only hangs out with
dreams.
You know, he hangs out, Michael. He hangs out with good billionaires. He doesn't hang out with any of the evil ones. Only the good Mark Cuban, Taylor Swift. You know, the good billionaires.
That's right.
Because they haven't exploited anyone on the way to get billions. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, speaking of billionaires, we've already mentioned him a couple times. One of the most hated men in the world, who has recently allegedly stepped down from his position in the government. That's right. It's Elon Musk. And he's the person who kind of occasioned this entire episode because of his obsession with robots. And, you know, Tesla, I think, is facing real problems because of sanctions, because of the fact that he can't sell his cars in China anymore effectively. And so there's one of the biggest potential markets is basically completely shut off for him. And also by just the plain fact that electric cars are being made by many more people. He has more competitors. It's a much more crowded market than it was, a few years ago.
And I think some of the political blowback, right, of a certain demographic within his client base that have come to hate him politically.
Yeah.
The negative brand value that has emerged out of, like, he started tweeting during like the Doge thing, like, please don't be mean to Tesla. All we do is make good cars, like this stuff, right? As though he couldn't understand the connection that was going on.
Yeah.
Despite being, I don't know if you heard, the actual smartest person in the history of the world.
Well, what a marvelous mind he has. I mean, who but a marvelous mind would name his robot the Optimus? Apparently, taking a page from...
so lame. It's all of this stuff.
Optimus? Like, you mean like the Transformer?
Yeah, very cool, man.
Deep.
Deep.
And he's been on this beat for a while, and there have been several demos of these robots. The first of which was literally one of the robots that just had a guy. It was just a guy in the robot costume coming out and demonstrating what the robot. But it was it was literally like a human pretending to be a robot.
Yeah, there were a couple such incidents. There was another incident in a demo after I believe they had been caught doing that the first time, where it was a similar demo with a robot, and there was just an assistant a few feet away,
like with a joystick.
Yeah, essentially, I think.
Yeah, and I think up until now, all of the robot demos he's done have been remote operated. So,
but again, like part of the overall and we will see it with a lot of these things, not just Optimus, but AI, but also Musk, right? Is a lot of these guys they basically run their con by claiming like, well, everything happens exponentially, right? Is kind of the whole deal. So it's like, oh yeah, we had the human controlling it just to give an idea of what it is going to look like, but it's going to come so fast that despite the fact that we still have an assistant standing beside him trying to like quietly control
yeah.
Actually, in about 10 years, I think every single American will have a robot.
It has the possibility, as we'll talk about this at the end of the episode, but yeah, he thinks robots are going to be like a bigger product than cars. That everyone's going to have a humanoid robot in their house. Like we're going to
think about this.
I mean, I think it's insane. But
I think that it seems to me that when it comes to these types of robot assistants that have been like popping up for years, right? There's always like a robotics convention. It's like,
sure,
this thing can do.
And the Boston Dynamics. Oh, look at the dog robot or whatever.
Right, and so like kind of like with the internet, where in the early stages of the internet, it's like, oh yeah, man, like everyone's gonna be working maybe 4 8-hour weeks, you know. This is kind of like, oh yeah, domestic work's going to change forever.
Sure, but that's all. But of course, as we've discussed, like this is all premised on the idea that like there would be fully automated luxury communism, right? That we'd all be getting money from just for being alive.
I think that part of the what sort of lies at the bottom of all this for these people at least, and a lot of people who do look at something like Optimus, which we'll explain a little bit more about what Optimus is supposed to do, but you know, the idea of having like a domestic assistant, like it feels like so many people like just hate the basic act of living.
Yeah,
it's very crazy to me. Like it's not like I enjoy doing just a lot of chores all the time. But I really don't enjoy it, as you know. You know what I mean? It's like it's this idea that type of work not only has no value, but no like mental value either.
Right.
In terms of like what your sense of self and your life is, and that if you just got rid of all that, you'd be doing what exactly? Like I guess.
Well, let's see. I mean, you'd be using
James Joyce because now you don't have to do the dishes or, you know, take out the garbage because your little robot's climbing around your house. You know?
Right, but I think another point about this is all the AI art stuff, right? It's like, why bother learning to paint when you can just have, you know...
Right, you can just say your idea into AI, like, make me a painting, and kind of feel like it's your painting because you said it to the machine.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas, like, the value of painting is...
the act of painting.
Yeah, like, the reason I like to paint is, you know, it gives me strange experiences. Yeah. Like I'll be painting something, maybe an abstract painting, and I'll be so focused on it that I'll have these strange memories, and not traumatic memories like I talked about last time, but just random memories. Like I remember when I was painting a lot, maybe 5 years ago, I kept painting and having this vision of this street in the island of Rhodes that I once visited. And it would just like, as I was painting something randomly, this like memory would just surface very vividly in the like background of my mind. And I'd be like, I'd feel that like that energy of that vacation I'd been on 10 years before or whatever, kind of coming back to me. And I've had other images like that arise as I'm doing my work.
Interesting.
And that's of value because it's so strange. And so it like helps me feel connected to my own past. And it's
and it's also like a moment outside of the quotidian time. Right?
Absolutely.
In and of itself is valuable. I mean, when it comes to things like the repetitive domestic tasks that Elon Musk envisions will be taken care of by Optimus, I mean, I think you often find them annoying. You just as often find them almost meditative, calming. You know, there's a sense. It's not like you run around and celebrate because you accomplished the act of cleaning your room, but like I, these
No.
people seem to think that if you empty everything that has been life, if you turn that and remove it, that what will be filled, we will fill it with, are all of these things that somehow have more meaning and are more exciting and more fulfilling. And no one seems to have really come up with what those things actually are.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's like having a fully utilitarian view of everything, right? It's like, well, why, Stu, your band is not famous. Why are you bothering to practice the guitar?
Right, right, right.
It's
That's right.
like, well, playing the guitar
So,
is another thing that's fun.
right. Before we talk about a little more about Optimus and Musk, do you want to just give us a bit of a crash course in some robotic stuff and how we move forward?
Why, I'd love to. So I'm so glad you asked. Um, yeah. So the idea of the robot, the idea of a mechanical being, is very old, right? I mean, we can find it in ancient myths from the Greeks. We
Mm.
can find it in the myths of China, in the ancient Jewish myths of the golem, right? These are all like these artificial beings that come to life and perform tasks. And the actual, I mean, last week we were talking about the Sandman and about automata. Like, actual automata were first constructed in the Hellenistic era of Greece and in the early imperial period of China. So, at around 300 years before Christ. And these robots, by our standards, were very primitive, but we're talking about, mechanisms where a steam powered, a bowl of water would be heated up and the steam would go
Okay.
up and it would cause a bird to like rise up on a pillar that was like elongating and
Like a
then
wooden bird or something?
metal. Yeah, and then
Oh,
and then it
okay.
would reach its peak, and it would like let out a song that was like the steam coming out of a valve that was opened when it got to the apex of its, like
Right, right.
and these were steam powered. If the Greeks had been more practically oriented in their thought, they might have realized, wait a minute, we can harness this steam power, perhaps for some kind of engine, right?
Right.
I mean, I've often thought about this because at the same time in Corinth, Corinth is this part where the Peloponnese meets the rest of Greece and meets Attica. And it's a very thin peninsula. And they had this trackway where in order to get boats across it, where you load your boat onto this thing and roll it down. And the trackway was essentially almost like a train track. If someone had been like, wait, what if we, like the steam engine could have been invented in 300 BC is kind of what I'm getting at. But it wasn't, right?
Interesting.
I mean, these things arise when they do. Um, we hear about, basically the early um, automata that were built, or the earliest examples of sort of mechanical beings that performed actions based on a kind of set program, were entirely aesthetic, right? They would
Mhm.
they would get up, they would do. You hear about these in the Byzantine Empire, right? That the Byzantine emperor's throne, when a guest he wanted to impress would come in, would rise up using some kind of complex pulley and lever mechanism. And Yeats in his poem talking about the golden birds of Byzantium that would sing, right? These are all these things that are meant to impress, to show the kind of power, and in a way to emulate magic, right?
Mhm.
Because they're operating by a mechanism that the common person would not have understood and would have had to have assumed was somehow magical. And we see only later, towards the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance, that we get um, the first kind of more practically oriented robotic systems. And one of them is invented by this Chinese inventor called Su Song during the Song Dynasty, which is around the 1100s, 1200s. And it was a kind of water clock that was powered, that would power a drum machine that would chime at different rhythms, and you could kind of change the rhythm that the drum machine would chime at by moving different pegs into different positions. And this is the first known historical example of a chain drive, whereby
Mhm.
flowing water's power was transferred to another mechanism by means of like a chains and pulley system. Um, this was dismantled by the Jurchens. They didn't like it. And after the Jurchens left, the guys who were like, oh no, Susong's, water clock has been dismantled. They couldn't figure out how to put it back together. But there are books about it. There's a record of how it was made. A little bit later, in the 13th century, the Islamic scientist Ismail al-Jazari created several humanoid automata, including one that Wikipedia describes in the following way, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
One of al-Jazari's humanoid automata was a waitress that could serve water, tea, or drinks. Drink was stored in a tank with a reservoir, from where the drink drips into a bucket and, after 7 minutes, into a cup, after which the waitress appears out of an automatic door serving the drink. So you make a selection, and then 7 minutes the waitress is getting it ready, and she pops out and is like, here is your drink.
A great, such an early example of the feminizing of
yeah, exactly
the robot to do the domestic task.
Yeah,
so perfect for everything that has come since.
Totally. And Jazari's made several different automata with different functions. Another, unfortunately, one of my old enemies has returned into the podcast, and that is, of course, Da Vinci. That hack designed a quote-unquote night robot, which was able to raise its hand and salute and wave or something.
Not fight, but do all the ceremony.
Well, it was and it was the plans for it were only rediscovered in the 1950s in one of his notebooks. But as usual, he never built it, and there is zero evidence that such a device could have possibly worked. So once again, Mr. Big Idea Da Vinci has this useless schematic, and people are like, "Wow, he invented robots." When we've already just said that there were robots before that were better, that actually did work, that there were Chinese and Islamic robots. But no, Da Vinci invented the robot. Anyway. But as I said, the al-Jazari's robots are automata, really, are the first that had kind of a practical application, right? Just the waitress, right? That does something. That fulfills a need that might have been otherwise taken by a human. Whereas these Byzantine and Greek examples, as I said before, are mostly aesthetic. And I think that's something to keep in the back of our mind as we talk about this. We talked last week about the German automata, right? The sort of clockwork mechanisms that are literally on clocks in some cases, but also were made as sort of again, aesthetic primarily. Their function was primarily aesthetic, to impress people, like Spallanzani with his Olympia. Olympia, as we said from the stories, it's not that realistic, but there were Olympia-esque, automata. Now,
and she's being shown off like a debutante, right?
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at. The first remote control devices, looking back to the drones we talked about at the top and to the guy with the joystick in the Elon demos, were actually torpedoes that were made in the late 19th century. And they were controlled by a wire that would go run off from the ship as the torpedo was leaving, and you could kind of send a signal across the wire to control its movement.
Did it work?
It did, yeah. I mean, the first torpedoes were like this. Did it work? Yes. I mean, how well did it work? I don't know. The footage was lost. And no. And that brings us up into the 20th century, which is really the heyday of robots, right? Mm-hmm. And the word robot itself derives from the Czech play RUR, which is Rossum's Universal Robots, which is by Karel Čapek, which was first written and performed in 1920. Čapek himself says that his brother, who was an artist, actually is the one who came up with the name robot. And it has a derivation in Czech, which basically means laborer or serf or something. And, weird. And the robots in the play are kind of more like the androids we saw in Blade Runner, or the companion robots. They're they're humanoid. They're indistinguishable outwardly from humans, but they're made of some kind of mysterious protoplasm material, and they're artificial. And at least initially, they have no free will and are just single-mindedly focused on the tasks to which they're assigned. But in in the play, which I think we might do an episode about this play. I was thinking about that because I think it'd be worth reading. It's pretty short and it has a very end of the world ending, because basically what happens is a couple of the robots eventually get some level of self-awareness and are like, wait a minute, like, this is fucked.
These idiots are in charge?
Yeah, and so by the end, they have literally killed all the humans except for one. And then the last scene is like the last remaining humans being like, I think we can fend them, you know. But one of the last humans to die destroys the like recipe for making more robots. So this is sort of the crisis of the play is, but we'll talk more about that in the future. Around the 20s is when the first robots in the sort of modern sense of humanoid robots are built, right? And one of them, they're kind of mostly built as gimmicks for things like World's Fairs. So, for instance, Westinghouse built one called Electro with a K, and it was a sort of like the icon for this episode is an image of Electro, and basically he could recite like 700 words based on, and it was like he had a little record player in his belly that would like, and I'm pretty sure that, you know, there was a person controlling what he says and doesn't say. It's not like he's operating autonomously, but he can move his arm, and he even had a little robot dog as well. I think the dog was called like Sparky or something like that. But soon after this, robotic functionality becomes the primary focus, especially during World War II, right? So
what, to help with manufacturing?
Basically, what we think of when we talk about automation, the kind of robots that are function built and that don't look like people. And we saw an example of this at the final scene of The Terminator, which we talked about in episode 34. This is the end, I believe we called it. Mm-hmm. And where he goes into that factory and it's like he has this moment of like, my brothers, where he's like looking at all the machines that are in the factory, kind of like. Now, after World War II, we must, of course, mention my favorite topic, that is, of course, cybernetics, where the sort of theory of robots as kind of anti-entropic mechanisms that are on a spectrum, along with animals and humans, starts to arise. And this is where the idea of AI really comes from, right? That if we could build a mechanism that could use memory in the way humans and animals use memory to govern future actions based on the outcomes of past actions, then we could get towards building an actually autonomous, that is to say, artificially intelligent robot. Now, that hasn't happened, right? I mean, we've been working on it, and this brings us kind of back to, we've already touched on a bunch of this, like the sort of Boston Dynamic robots that are used in some applications. I think General Motors,
like the
dogs that are used as for bomb like squad. They send in the robot dog to defuse the bomb.
They just fully look like they're designed to be in a dystopian movie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, these are examples of people who have not thought enough about the aesthetics of what they're doing, perhaps.
Interesting. Yeah.
I think the way aesthetics plays in this is interesting. It, of course, brings up the uncanny valley, which we've talked about before, right? Mm-hmm. Which is that feeling, and, you know, appropriate for last week's episode again, that feeling when, like, a robot is humanoid but not quite human enough, it causes us to feel very uneasy. Whereas if a robot is like C-3PO, it's like humanoid, but it's made of metal and it's a robot. We're like, oh, it's cute, right? Yeah. Whereas if it starts to have like rubbery skin and looks like a mannequin that's moving, we're kind of like, keep that away from.
Do you have free will? And then you make a whole movie about it.
Yep, exactly. And so robots are back in a big way because of automation on the one hand, and those are robots that are boxes, right? That have one arm, they move from one place to another, they lift a thing, they put it down, they move to the thing, they lift it, they put it down. Bringing back the aesthetic thing once again is like Musk seems to be really obsessed with making humanoid robots,
Yeah,
right?
what drives that? Do you think? It seems very odd because it's not even necessarily the best thing for the functions, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, there's the interview that sort of spurred this whole episode where he talks about this with CNBC. This was a week or so ago. This is where the quote I mentioned earlier, where he says, "The biggest robots have the possibility to be the biggest product ever." He says he imagines them costing around 30K to start, and I'm like, okay, so you're going to destroy all work,
Mm-hmm.
and all no one will have money, but you're going to make
But
$30,000 robot.
I got you an Optimus,
That,
30 grand.
at some
It
point,
doesn't.
it's
It just says these banalities as though they have some sort of like possibility or like weight to them simply because they're coming from his mouth. Like the way that he kind of says, like, I actually just think that they're going to be the biggest product ever, like the biggest product ever. And then he's talking to the Tesla people. He's like, I don't even think it's just going to be the biggest product ever. I think it could be, I would say, 10 times bigger than any other product. And
a
you're
little
like,
bit like Trump in that way.
yes, it's like that's not grounded to anything. What's the point of saying that? Like you just decided 10 times bigger than any other product in forever. Like who is this for? Other than like this is why it always seems like on it from his side, it always just feels like such a con to me.
Oh,
Like
absolutely. And I think, well, here's the other thing. Just we should bring this back, tie in the AI jobs thing once again, which is like all these guys, these tech people, are like, yeah, we're going to replace everyone's job with the robot, and we're going to make sure the government keeps taxes as low as possible for us.
mm-hmm.
Make sure there's no redistributive apparatus in the federal government. It's like, all right, motherfucker, who's going to fucking buy your bullshit?
That's right.
Like at some point, this tips into a dystopian inequality. Not to sound like that jerk we were quoting before, but
Yeah.
like if you destroy all people's ability to make money, you also destroy their ability to spend their money on your bullshit.
Yep. That's right. And I think not just I mean, yes, this is a really good point when you're just speaking to like the sheer crassness and greed of those people, right?
Yeah,
But the thing that always just seems to get missed that you would think that if there was anything genuine in what these people were trying to do, and not just the ones just trying to sell, but the people who have this weird philosophical utopian idea of what is about to happen, that none of them spend any time on figuring out any type of social framework
yeah,
to absorb the blows that are to come. And in fact, like I said at the beginning, all of the critiques they have of places like Washington and the inability to process that and to have any type of unifying force to deliver things to workers who might not need to work. As soon as it comes down to the fact that, like, maybe you guys could have also been thinking about this a little bit while you were, creating the things that were going to destroy work. But they feel like they are permitted to just be like, oh, yeah, that all of the negative consequences, those aren't what we are dealing with. That's just what everyone else is going to have to deal with. And we're going to be out here creating, whatever strange Faustian paradise that they've decided that we all want. Like, that's the other thing. Like, we are now in an era where, like, these tech people are able far more, like, sort of using the idea of, like, exponential force of this technology. Like, they are able to speak for people and dictate the sort of like movement of history in a way that we have never seen before. Like
yeah.
we don't have any type of other than like authoritarian states are
Well, I
kind
was
of
gonna say like Julius Caesar has come to your village, right? Like, I mean,
right, right. But again, kind of the way that we, the workers, are even one further removed from the means of production, right? Because
yep,
now we're like just watching a machine do our job. But we didn't and so now that's going to be really bad, and guys like the CEO are really worried. But it misses the point that like we already have been separated, which has made this whole thing possible,
that's right.
which has made the scary situation he's now worried about even worse when the time comes. And so like they are able to do like to make these decisions. Guys like Musk are like, no, I think it'd be cool if it looked like a human. And it's like it actually said like we have this thing. It's like the former head of Tesla's robotics unit.
Right, it's like this is idiotic.
Yeah, it's like if you want them to do certain type of tasks, they don't need to look like that.
Yeah. Because the human form is not optimized for ultra repetitive. I mean, we know this. That's why carpal tunnel exists. And like,
Yeah,
right?
right. It tells you that like there's this underlying all of this is this kind of element of play and lack of concern that that can only come from the most profound level of narcissism and selfishness. That like they sit around, it really seems, and they basically talk about the different ways that this could lead to the destruction of everybody's lives. And then they just carry on. In fact, I just watched and I'm sure we'll do an episode about it, but Jesse Armstrong, the Succession guy,
Uh-huh.
he just put out Mountainhead.
Oh, sure. No, we probably should do an episode on that.
Yeah, and so maybe we'll do it in a few weeks after people would have watched it. But like, essentially, it's these four billionaires in tech who are together as one of them releases a sort of AI that creates incredibly lifelike and realistic looking but unverifiable like video and audio. So all these deep fakes lead to all this stuff, but we'll just talk about it more. But all this to say, it's like that is what's happening.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not. It's the movie's obviously kind of in the Succession world of exaggeration, but like that is what is taking place, and the idea of the whole show, which I think we should probably do as well. It's like that they also think that there's like, well, there's AI potential is really dangerous. Then we'll make guardrail AI, right? It's like Jesus Christ, guys. Like, when has anything like this ever actually worked right? And people often point like, well, people were really scared of the internet. And it's like, yeah, the first time we even had close to like a fully realized social media landscape, Donald Trump became president of the United States.
Yeah.
So is that the proof that your technology improves
and is safe?
Better? Yes, that's right.
Well, and I think a lot of this is also just coming from a space of fantasy and aesthetic delusion. I mean, let me read the rest of this Musk quote, right? He says, it'll be the biggest product ever. Demand will be insatiable. And then he ends his comments by saying, who wouldn't want their own personal C-3PO or R2-D2?
Right.
And it's like, oh, so you just want like Star Wars to be real. Like that at some base level, there's just this like absolute fantasy that's dictating all of this.
Yep. Well, it's the same way that like, again, the kind of pushing forward and the con artistry of it all is like, oh yeah, if we ever reach the point where our limitations are due to like our planet, well then we'll just have to go find some other spot.
We'll have to go to Mars, kick the can down the road.
That's right.
We'll go to Mars, and we won't destroy Mars because we've just treated our first planet so well.
Yeah, and I guess you do have this group of people who it's an interesting sort of running up to the idea of the podcast in its original form. Of like the way that apocalyptic thinking has moved into both, pop culture and alternative cultures, into the more of the mainstream, into our now politics and our economics, right? And it's wild to see that like it did start with guys like him, Musk, who when they were kids were like, be very cool if Star Wars was like the world and we all traveled around to different galaxies, different planets, and hung out in different ways. And
just how long until he introduces a laser sword, right? I mean,
right, and seriously, right? Like,
no, I mean, I'm not even kidding. Like,
yeah, and at the end of the day, what it comes down to is these people seem to believe that if you believe in your own bullshit, everything is excused.
That's right.
That's basically the only requirement now, to do things without any sense. And again, like, the things that they always say always go back to like, well, people were scared of the radio.
Right. And it's like, well, this is a little different than just the radio, but also didn't the radio have some problems? Like,
right. And again, like when it comes down to it,
didn't that allow for like remote bombing of places? Like
the reason that I think this becomes such a consistent theme of the podcast, right, is that like the whole thing shows that, among all the things we don't know, that these CEOs who are trying to help us out by giving us warnings, oh, everything's so unknown. But yeah, you know what else is like unknown? The scale at which humans can exist in this environment.
Yeah,
it's been a very early, very young phase still in terms of our like increasing, technocracy or whatever the hell this is. But the idea that we can just like, well, for people who saw this is actually in the movie that I was just talking about. It's like people who saw the first movie thought the train coming towards it.
Right.
Oh, yeah, cool. Well, okay, it wasn't. Whereas this one is actually just going to like run into the real world, then take your job, and then kick you out of your fucking house, and then charge you $7,000 a month to move back into it. So it's not quite the same as going to the pictures, like,
yeah.
And they just believe that there's this adaptability, when I think a more honest reading of what's going on is we've been starting to show the cracks, right, in our limit of adaptability, which is leading to like the return of a degree of nativism and isolationism and protectionism, and like, concern that like all of this is going to go away, and that what is going to replace it is not this kind of thing that like, oh yeah, now that AI runs the world, I just kind of find my place and all's good.
Yeah. No, I think that's well said. All right. Well, that's our discussion of robots and AI. We are going to probably continue with that. We haven't picked our topic for next week just yet. It's been a busy few days. But I'm sure we'll continue along these lines. I have some ideas I'm going to pitch to Michael as soon as we're off the mics. But until then, you can follow us on Instagram at the End of the World WMS. You can also follow us on the podcatcher of your choice. You can, if you really like us, you can leave us a rating and or review on that podcatcher. And until next week, this has been the End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
Are you a robot? You're Michael and I'm Stu. And we'll talk to you real soon.